for the Agile community. www.Agile.FM. Welcome to another episode of Agile.FM, and today I have a German fellow, and not only a German fellow, also a podcast fellow. I have Marc Loeffler with me, and Marc is a podcaster of the Passionate Team podcast, but he's also the author of the book Improving Agile Retrospectives, and that is also the .com domain name, improvingagileretrospectives.com, all in one word, no spaces and dashes and so forth. Marc, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Marc, you have written this book about Agile Retrospectives. Now, definitely want to talk a little bit about that. But before we get started, the Passionate Team podcast. So you are passionate about passion and podcasting about passionate teams. You do that in English and in German.
Yes, I do, yes.
That shows a lot of passion because that means a lot of maintenance and effort and getting all these things out. Why is that? Who do you want to reach with these podcasts?
I think for me, what's important with the Passionate Teams podcast, that for me, the core of every successful product development team, and for me, doesn't matter if it's agile or not, is to have some kind of a passionate team. And so if you don't have a passionate team, you can apply any method to this team and it won't work. So I truly believe that first of all, you have to find ways how to get passion back into teams, and then agile tools will help them for sure. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't help if you have a dead team, I would say, which doesn't really work, and you just apply agile, scrum, whatever on this team. It's like putting a new shiny saddle on a dead horse. Mm-hmm. And that's why I truly believe this is really important to talk about this topic.
Mm-hmm. Well, you just said like a dead team, right? You also have references on your website about killing passion. So these are very strong words. Yes. How can somebody kill passion on a team? How is this even possible?
Oh, that's easy, I think. So if you're lucky, you had a team that worked quite well, then it's quite easy still to kill this passion. But even worse, in some companies, there aren't even any passionate teams, or you have to really search them really, really carefully somewhere. Maybe they're hiding somewhere. But yeah, I think I just had a team a few weeks ago which worked quite well, and then they decided, okay, let's ramp this team up, put some more people into this team. And so what they did, they just said, it's really expensive to get some more European or German engineers into the team. Let's get some engineers from India. And I don't have anything against engineers in India. That's what I want to say. But these guys in India, they have no clue about the project. They don't know what's really happening here. They were just put into this team without any knowledge what they can do here. It's just, okay, it looks like an engineer. Let's put him in a team. And now the whole team is brought to halt because now everybody has to support these Indian guys now. And they are now starting to work on topics which are not important at the moment, because otherwise they wouldn't have anything to do at the moment, because everything else is too complicated and they don't really know how to solve this in India, because nobody from this project team is in India at the moment. So it's just like some satellite sitting there somewhere. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the things they did to just slow the whole thing down. And this is just one way how you can do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, in this case, that person from India would be like a synonym, or like anybody from any kind of offshore development team, right?
Yes.
That would apply to anybody. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we see that in our industry quite a bit, right? Cost reductions and so forth, and then have people from other parts of the world contribute, whoever's available at that time. So that is a passion killer, in your opinion.
Yeah, from my point of view, it's a passion killer.
Yeah.
It's in Germany we would say it's a Milchmädchenrechnung, a milkmaid calculation. Maybe, I don't know if there's a real English translation for that.
Simple math, right?
Yeah, because it's sure. Yeah, maybe offshore people are cheaper, and but what you get additionally is you get lots of additional maintenance. Just simple things like doing a daily in the morning. Now you have to set up a video conference or telephone conference for that. It already takes time. And then it's more difficult to get these people into the team. And I think it's really important if you're building a team to really do some kind of team building, and if you have just one or two satellites, I call them satellites, in a far location offshore somewhere, it's really difficult then to really get a team spirit in such a team. And what I on the other hand, it's possible from my point of view, saying, okay, let's build a team in India with 4 to 5 engineers, for example, give them a dedicated topic and really try to build a great Indian team somewhere, and then give them some dedicated topic they can work on. And I think that can work. But if you have teams distributed over time zones and far away, and then you're trying to build passionate teams, it's really difficult.
So passion is really about like ownership of work, autonomy, where people can really shape something together rather than being handed down tasks from somebody else.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Some people, I heard that, this is really far-fetched for me personally, but I heard that some people don't enjoy coming to work on a daily basis. And you mentioned that in one of your blog posts, that passion really has also something to do. Do you like to come to work? Do you enjoy coming to work? And when you go to these Agile conferences around the world, there's so much energy and I would say some form of passion. People come to conferences in the first place. Is that even relevant for the Agile community? Do you see people in the Agile world not liking to come to work? And B, what do we need to do if that's the case, how to change that?
Yeah, I think I see something like that happening, but especially when these people who are coming energized from a conference back into the company, and then they're not able to move anything, to change anything, to adapt anything, and they just get back in their old culture and they only can do tiny changes, then they get frustrated and then they start to don't want to get to work back again. And especially in Germany, we still have this culture of staying with the company even for longer times, maybe a bit different in the US. So people, they're really hesitating of leaving a company because where to find a new job, whatever. And so sometimes they just stay even if they're not really happy where they are. And that's where some of the pain begins in the end.
So you're saying like people bring an energy, energy. Yeah, no problem. Some people bring the energy home from a conference, and they just don't feel like the spirit continues to live in the organization. And it's getting stale, and obviously, and the negative side effects out of that. Here's something I noticed in your writing, and that's also an interesting thing. We often hear people recommend teams to stay together over a longer period of time, have a shared learning, and then you do also throw something out that's more like a tactic, I guess, and that is a dynamic reteaming. And that is about changing things up a little bit, if I understand that correctly. Why is that?
Yeah,
why is that, and how does that relate to passion?
This is interesting. This was a podcast episode I did with Heidi Helfand. She's from California, Santa Barbara. And she wrote a book on dynamic reteaming. And I had the exact same question. Is it really about just changing and shaking a team all of the time? And no, it's not. It's just having, of course, some kind of stable teams. But what she said is, from time to time, it's good to bring 1 or 2 new people into a team to get just some fresh energy, some new fresh ideas. And then, of course, you leave this team alone again for some months or maybe even a year or something like that before you put maybe somebody else in the team again. So it's not about just breaking this team up every few weeks or every sprint maybe.
For sure.
It's really about building stable teams, but bringing fresh energy from time to time. I think that's what she calls dynamic reteaming.
And you have seen that in action in some of your work. Do you feel like that's an interesting technique some of the listeners might take away? It's like in between projects or maybe after a few projects to rejuvenate a passion within a team might be a good idea.
Yeah, I think it might be a good idea. But the reality, what I see a lot is that teams are changing a lot and people are pulled into teams, and so the teams don't really get time to really build and come together as a team. And I think this is also something where people and companies should invest more time in just investing into teams. And there's the saying, never touch a running system, but also never touch a running team is, I think, something which is very true.
Yeah. You have, I looked at your profile, I believe it was on LinkedIn, and you have a background as a traditional project manager with Volkswagen.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct,
Yeah.
yes.
I mean, that's been a few years since you played that role. How is that compared to what you do today, and what is it you learned from that environment that influenced what you're doing today? Obviously, you're now a coach, a trainer, author, and so forth, in a very different aspect of the industry. But I'm just curious to hear how, what kind of transition you made and what are the things you learned in that transition.
So what I learned in the first step was that I'm not made for big corporations because they're changing too slow for me. I'm a guy who loves to change and to adapt and try new things, and this environment was clearly not that fast paced in changing and adapting. And but what I brought with me is then a lot of experience in big corporations. So I'm coaching and consulting a lot of these bigger companies. And the good thing is now I know how they are working. I know their DNA. I know that. So for example, I'm not coaching or consulting those companies 4 to 5 days a week because it doesn't make sense, because they won't be able to just digest what I give them. And so I'm going more into these companies to say, okay, I'm here maybe for 2 days a week, just give you some impulses, and then maybe even work with more than one team just to give different teams different impulses. And then you can see over a longer period of time, maybe 1 or 2 months, sometimes 3 years, now something is shifting slowly, but it's shifting. But I think the most important takeaway for me is, yes, you can change such companies, but it takes a hell of time. And for me, it's really frustrating then to be in such companies for 5 days a week. Doesn't work for me. But I can also truly understand or totally understand people working in such companies that they got frustrated sometimes.
And these are the ones that we just spoke earlier about. That would go to those conferences and then come back and see a very different environment. Then, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, I'm here with Marc Loeffler, and Marc Loeffler is with an umlaut. That is MarcLoeffler, and that is his Twitter handle. And we're going to return back to this podcast in just a moment. Agile is all about inspection and adaptation, and so is Agile.FM. If you like the show, please visit the show page of Agile.FM on iTunes and leave a comment rating for us. You can now also visit Agile.FM, the website, and leave a comment about a specific individual episode online. Welcome back to this podcast with Marc, and we just spoke a little bit about passion. We talked about his previous experiences in a large corporation. We did talk a lot about his podcast, which is available on his website, marcloeffler.eu. And I do want to spend a little bit of time now talking about your book, Improving Agile Retrospectives. I think it is out of the Mike Cohen series. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that book. There are a couple of retrospective books out there. Is that a techniques book? Is that a tools book? What can readers expect out of that book?
This book is, I think, of course, there are some techniques in the book. I think what this book focusing on, which maybe some other retrospectives books are not doing that much, is really focusing on how to facilitate retrospectives, what are some common pitfalls, how to come over them, using tools from system thinking and complexity thinking retrospectives. I think these are the chapters which are completely different from other books from my point of view, and that are missing currently in other books. And there's also a chapter about metaphors, or how to use metaphors in retrospectives. So how can you build your own activities, like doing a soccer retrospective or a kitchen retrospective, something like that, for example. So this time, of course, there's a primer. So the first chapter is really about what is retrospective. Second chapter is really how you can facilitate your first own retrospective. And there's just a template which you can use for that one. And the rest is about facilitation, visual facilitation, system thinking, complexity thinking. I think that's interesting.
Yeah. The meeting itself, the event in, for example, in Scrum, when people go through the retrospectives on a regular basis, it's kind of surprising that the meeting itself is what I observe very often in my work with teams is either it's poorly done or it's skipped altogether in not so rare occasions. And why do you think that is? Why do teams and facilitators have such a hard time with that event?
I think the main problem here is that people don't see a purpose in retrospectives. So it happens, for example, that you're talking about the same thing again and again and again, and it's not really changing. And this may also be a reason because you're in an environment where change is really hard. And when you maybe worked on all these low-hanging fruits, which are quite easily for you, maybe in your team environment to solve, and then you need to tackle stuff that is around your team, your organization, whatsoever, it gets tougher and harder. And then you can't see these positive effects anymore, not so fast anymore. And I think that's one of the reasons. And the other thing is, people often forget about the things they decided in retrospective. So they have a list of things they would like to tackle, but then they just completely get lost. And then after 4 weeks or 2 weeks, whatever your sprint length is, then you find out, we discussed about it. Nobody worked on that one. Okay. But even if they worked on something like that and they had these tasks and they did it, nobody is checking if what they did had the desired effect. So what I call a hypothesis. You usually have some kind of hypothesis if you do something. And I think it's important to check if you did something, did it really solve the problem? If not, then please don't start on the same level, on a just in German would say on the grünen Wiese. I don't know if you translate English. And don't start from zero again, but start from where you left the last retrospective and find out, okay, we tried something, it didn't work, so what else can we try to solve this problem? And then you get some kind like a purpose where you see, okay, yeah, we are trying to tackle this problem from different directions and really try to solve it. And if you don't do it like that, then it's really, really difficult. Or what I also see is something like, I attended retrospective a few years ago, and the first question was, what was really bad the last 2 weeks? Okay. If you only talk about bad stuff all of the time and you're always just putting your finger in the wound every time and just showing what everything went wrong and so on, I think it's really important also to focus on positive effects. So of course your team did also some great things. So why not just talk about these great things too, and maybe talk about how you can improve these things even more. And I think it's also important to have a little party about things that really rocked and think about how this can be even better maybe in the future, and not only talk about all the things that didn't work.
Well, I'm curious to hear what you just mentioned about metaphors a little bit, how you use them, and if you have an example. I mean, I would just imagine any team is quite diverse. To find a metaphor that works for everyone is probably quite tricky already at that point. But what do you do, or do you take something very generic, something everybody can relate to?
So in Germany, it's easy. Soccer is, I think, in Germany is really usually nearly everyone knows at least a bit of soccer, and but of course you can do stuff like kitchen retrospectives where it's about, okay, how does a kitchen look like and how did we cook our last dishes the last sprint? So we are using the metaphor of cooking dishes, which is implementing features, and just transfer this into the kitchen language, for example. And so I think that's also working for a lot of people. Or what I did is also doing train retrospective, so train rides. So you're writing a little diary about your last train ride as a team, and just use this metaphor of the train about your trainer, what happened. Did everybody reach the end destination? Who left the train maybe in between? What was added to the train? So you can use these metaphors a lot for talking sometimes about difficult problems in your team. Is sometimes difficult if you talk directly about it. If you use metaphors, it's sometimes easier to talk about this elephant in the room. So that's why I like these metaphors, because it's easier for some people to really talk about maybe things that are usually not so easy to talk about.
Well, you just said something about the elephant in the room, right? It's you're actually implying that people are sitting actually in a room. How, like, lots of retrospective difficulties come from distributed teams. And other challenges when teams or programs are distributed, like multiple teams, scaling comes into the mix, right? How do you do retrospectives? So what kind of recommendations do you have for listeners here around retrospectives in distributed teams, but as well as, if it's very large project teams of several teams maybe working together, like in a scaled approach, how can they incorporate some of these techniques?
So for just purely distributed teams, what I like to use is a tool called Retrium. It's retrium.com. So these guys, they build a tool for retrospectives, which is quite nice. It's not for free, but I think you can do 2 or 3 retrospectives for free, and then you can decide if you want to use it or not. What I like about this tool is that it doesn't matter where you are, everybody's using the same tool. And I think it's more difficult if you're doing more or less a normal retrospectives with your team, which is local, and you have some people who are not local, maybe offshore, and they just connect via video conference or telephone conference, because it's really difficult then to incorporate them in the retrospectives.
That's right.
And when you use a common tool for everybody, it's a lot easier than to talk to each other. It's just, everybody's typing the same thing, the same tool. Everybody can see everything. And so I really recommend to use such tools. I think Scatterspoke is also one of these tools. So there are now 2 or 3 tools out there you can use for distributed retrospectives, and I highly recommend using them. And I think if you have to do it like that, then you should really use a powerful tool from my point of view.
So you would say even if it's a team of 6 and 5 are in a room and 1 is just on the phone somewhere else, you would still use a tool just to bring that one person into the mix.
Yeah, I would highly recommend doing that. And of course, if you really have a highly distributed team with lots of teams, maybe from my point of view, it makes sense to bring them together, maybe at least every quarter of a year, maybe every 3 months. Bring them in a big room, every 50 people, and do a big retrospective, maybe half a day. And the rest of the time, maybe the rest of the retrospective, I would just do locally. And only if needed, I would maybe do it on large scale. But I would really try to do retrospectives together at least every 3 months. I know that people have to travel, but from my point of view, the money you can spare or save by bringing people together from time to time will just I know travel costs are sometimes high, but you will get the costs in quite easily.
Yeah, benefits outweigh the cost. What do you think in general about scaling, Mark?
In general about scaling, I think one of the main problems with scaling, especially when we talk about SAFe, is it implies that if you use this for example, SAFe approach, which really looks nice from the outside, and you have this nice picture of all these different roles and processes and so on, and people, especially in bigger companies, just tend to look at that and say, that's already quite close to what we already have. We just need to tweak this role and this process a bit, and then we are already agile. So it's just covering the real problems, and you're not. It looks from the outside looks agile maybe, but from the inside it's not agile at all. And from my point of view, you have to do lots of homework first before even thinking about scaling, like simple things like having cross-functional teams. So what's the point of scaling if you still have functional containers, like there are the testers in one building, then we have the front-end developer somewhere, we have the back-end developer somewhere maybe, and then we have maybe some guys responsible for all the DevOps stuff, and then they're not really working together as a team, but distributed in different functional teams. And I think one of the key elements for being able to be agile is having cross-functional teams. And it's really interesting to see in a lot of bigger companies or companies that are growing, that there is still this belief that if we start to grow, we have to put people in containers and put a team lead on them. And it's really, from my point of view, ridiculous, because it doesn't help anybody, especially not in these fast times and complex times we have nowadays. And the next thing, which is quite important for me, which is always missing, I have a big list, but just to pick two, the second thing I think that is always missing is courage.
Yeah.
And you know that courage is maybe one of the Scrum values, and I think this is one of the number one things missing in lots of Agile teams, because Agile, the only thing Agile does, it's like your bad mother-in-law. It's just pointing at all the things that do not work. Agile does not solve any problems. So the thing is, you have to solve these problems. You have to do it. You have to tackle these things. You have to try things differently. And for that, you need courage. But if you are in an environment maybe where you're not allowed to experiment, we are not allowed to make mistakes, we are not allowed to not be part of the process or not working like the process is telling you how to work. And it's really difficult to be courageous and to tackle things. And then also Agile doesn't make sense for me, because then it's just, it's just...
Yeah, I think we're coming full circle here, right? To the beginning of our conversation where we talked about passionate teams.
Yes.
Right. So how could I expect passionate teams emerge out of an environment like this?
Really difficult, yes.
Right, very difficult. Hey, Marc, we're going to go through the rest of your list at a different podcast at some later point in time and talk a little bit more about scaling. I do want to thank you for sharing some of your thoughts around passion. You do a passion analysis on your website. It is at marcloeffler.eu. The book, just one more time, is the Improving Agile retrospectives.com for all the listeners who want to pick up a copy of that book and improve the way of how they do retrospectives. I want to just thank you here at the end of our podcast for taking your time.
Yeah, I thank you. It was a blast. Thanks for having me. It was really fun talking to you. And maybe we'll see us in some of the next conferences soon.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Agile.FM, the radio for the Agile community. I'm your host, Joe Krebs. If you're interested in more programming and additional podcasts, please go to www.agile.fm. Talk to you soon.